A pair of glasses lay in the weeds beside a body. Ordinary frames, police almost ignored them. But the hinge was patented. An optician traced it to 3 customers in the entire city of Chicago. 2 were quickly explained. The third belonged to a teenager who'd spent 7 months planning a perfect murder. Chicago, 1924. Nathan Leopold was 19, Richard Loeb was 18, both were brilliant, both were extremely rich. Leopold had already finished college, spoke several languages, and knew birds well enough to correct professors. Loeb was the University of Michigan's youngest graduate ever. Charming, restless, bored out of his mind. They lived blocks apart in Kenwood, stone mansions, chauffeurs, lawns, nobody crossed uninvited. Leopold had read Nietzsche and decided some men stood above ordinary rules. Obviously, he was one. Loeb didn't care about philosophy. Loeb wanted the thrill. He'd been stealing and setting small fires for years. One wanted proof of genius. One wanted a game. Together they were worse than either alone. So they set themselves a problem, the way you'd set a crossword. A murder nobody could solve. No motive. No connection to the victim. Kill a stranger for nothing, and police have nowhere to start. That's the theory. Watch how many separate things have to hold for it to work. They worked 7 months. Not in a frenzy, in the calm, plodding way you'd plan a trip. First problem, money. Not that they needed it. A ransom would make it look like a routine kidnapping. Second, the car. Their own were known. Chauffeurs tracked mileage, neighbors knew the color. So Leopold rented a room, opened a bank account, and collected mail as Morton D. Ballard. Loeb phoned the rental agency posing as a reference, vouching for a man who didn't exist. It worked. They drove off in a rented Willie's night, tied to neither family. That's the level of care. They rehearsed the ransom drop like a delivery route. Which train, which trackside landmark, where the money lands. They typed the ransom note in advance, before they even had a victim to name. They bought acid to make identification harder. They bought rope. They wrapped a chisel in tape for grip. Everything on that list, they thought about twice. Almost none of it's what caught them. And here's what people forget. After 7 months, they still hadn't decided who was going to die. They discussed one of their own fathers, a classmate, whoever happened to be walking alone. That's not genius. That's someone who has never once been told no. May 21st, 1924. A warm Wednesday. Loeb drove the rented car. Leopold sat beside him. School let out. They circled the private school both of them had attended years earlier. Bobby Franks, 14, was walking home from a baseball game, 4 blocks from his front door. He knew the man in the car. Loeb was his second cousin. They played tennis together. That's the detail that makes the word motiveless a lie. They picked someone who trusted them. Bobby got in. Minutes later he was dead, in a rented car, on a residential street. I won't dwell on it. What matters is what they did next, because it's unnervingly calm. They drove 20 miles south with the body under a blanket, stopped for sandwiches, and waited for dark. Then they hid him in a culvert near Wolf Lake, marshland. Leopold knew from years of birdwatching. That local knowledge felt like an advantage. Remember it. It becomes the worst thing about him. They poured acid. They pushed the body into the drainage pipe. In the dark, they thought he was hidden. He wasn't. A foot stayed above the waterline, plainly visible in daylight from the tracks above. And somewhere in that shuffle, something slid out of a coat pocket into the grass. Neither noticed. 7 months of rehearsal, and nobody thought to check a pocket. That night Leopold phoned the Franks' house as George Johnson. Your son is safe, don't call the police. $10,000, old unmarked bills. Jacob Franks agreed to everything and waited for instructions. Then the plan met the one thing planning can't control, a stranger going to work early. A laborer walking the tracks near Wolf Lake saw something pale in the water and called for help. By the time the ransom instructions arrived, the boy was already lying in a morgue. Franks was on the phone with the kidnapper when a friend called about a body being found. The alias, the bank account, the train, the landmark, the whole machine, was useless by breakfast. And here's where the case stops being a puzzle and starts being embarrassing for them. At the culvert, searchers had bagged those glasses. Nobody was excited about it. Glasses in a marsh mean nothing. Fishermen lose glasses. Half the city wore frames like that. The lenses were common. The prescription was common. The frames were a style sold everywhere. One thing wasn't. The hinge holding the earpiece was patented, stocked by a single Chicago optician, Almer Co. & Company. Police asked how many of those hinges the shop had ever sold. 3. 3 pairs in a city of nearly 3 million, not 300, 3. One buyer was a woman. One was a lawyer traveling abroad. That left a single name. Nathan Leopold. Rich, articulate, cooperative, and with no reason anyone on earth could see to lie. That's not a lucky break. That's a clerk with a sales ledger, doing the least glamorous work imaginable. If that reframes how these cases actually get solved, stick around, that's exactly what this channel is for. Because Leopold had an answer ready. And for a while, it was a very good one. He was a birder. He'd been in that marsh a week earlier, cataloging species, notebook in hand. That part was true. Years of documented trips. The glasses could have fallen on any one of them. He offered his field notes. He came in voluntarily. He stayed calm through hours of questions. So the state's attorney tried something almost childishly simple. He handed the glasses back to him. Put them in your breast pocket, he said. Now stumble. Now run. Now crouch like a birdwatcher. They stayed in the pocket. Every time. Those frames didn't fall out of a coat by accident. Which meant that pocket was jolted hard, or turned over while somebody was lifting something heavy. But here's the strange part. Leopold had barely worn those glasses at all. He'd been given them months earlier for headaches. Not everyday glasses, not the pair you pat for. That's exactly why they were fatal. You notice a missing wallet within an hour, keys at the door. You don't notice a thing you never use. They were gone 2 days. He never looked once. Meanwhile, 2 young daily news reporters were chasing something else entirely, the ransom note itself. It was typed. And in 1924, a typewriter was as individual as handwriting, if anyone bothered comparing. Letters sat slightly off, worn edges, a high comma, one character striking a hair above the line. The reporters knew Leopold ran a law study group and typed up notes for the other students. So they collected those study sheets, ordinary class notes. Then they laid them beside the ransom note. The same tired letters. The same crooked characters. One machine had produced both documents. Leopold insisted his notes came from a different typewriter. He was very specific about that. Except the Underwood portable was sitting at the bottom of a Jackson Park lagoon, where they'd sunk it. Police dragged it out. Rusted, keys missing, letterfaces matching the note. That's 2 objects now. 2 objects, and the one they'd carefully destroyed wasn't the one that ruined them. Still, both men held their story. It was sturdy, because they'd built it together months in advance. They'd been driving Leopold's own Red Willie's night that afternoon. Drinking. They picked up 2 girls in a park. Edna and May. Dropped off later. No last names, no addresses, nothing anyone could check. Unverifiable is usually strong. And they'd rehearsed it until it felt less like a lie than a memory. Then investigators did the plainest thing available. 2 separate rooms. The same questions asked again. And someone went to Leopold's house and asked the chauffeur, Sven Englund, one boring question about the car. Englund remembered the day clearly. Leopold's red car never left the garage. He'd spent the afternoon repairing it. The whole alibi rested on a car sitting up on jacks, with the chauffeur underneath it. That's the collapse. No confession beaten out of anyone. A servant who remembered doing his job. In separate rooms, each told the other was already talking. They broke within hours of each other. Both confessed. Both described the same afternoon in nearly identical detail, except for one thing. Each said the other did the actual killing. The partnership ended in the time it takes to say it. Clarence Darrow pled them guilty and argued for weeks to keep 2 teenagers off the gallows. It worked. Life plus 99 years. Loeb was killed by another inmate 12 years later. Leopold was paroled in 1958. He spent his last years in Puerto Rico, working in a hospital lab. He published a book on the island's birds. The birdwatching outlived the perfect crime by decades. So the perfect murder came down to a sales ledger, a stack of class notes, and a chauffeur's memory. They audited every object they touched. Neither one checked the pocket of the coat he was wearing. 2 men certain they stood above the law, undone by 3 people doing ordinary jobs carefully. Bobby Franks was 14. He never finished those last 4 blocks, and his name outlasted both of theirs. If you want the shoe leather version of these cases, instead of the legend, subscribe. Next, the floppy disk that ended a 30-year hunt. Cases like this deserve to be remembered. Bobby Franks deserves more than a footnote. See you next time.